All right, thanks for joining us. We're going to take a deep dive into the jury selection process that's happening over in Colleton County, South Carolina for the Murdaugh trial. Alex Murdoch is being accused of killing his wife and child, and the jury selection process has started this morning. The trial is underway, and we're going to give you a lawyer's perspective about what's happening and what are some of the important issues that are being looked at in this long process of jury selection, which is already underway as we speak. This morning, Murdoch arrived in court. They've summoned over 900 jurors in Colleton County, South Carolina, where Walterboro is located. The press has descended upon the town. This is one of the biggest trials in memory. It's been a huge deal here and just about everywhere, especially if you're located in the low country. There's just no way you could have escaped hearing about this trial. Which brings us to some major issues that are going to be involved with selecting a jury in this case. One of the interesting things is that the audio of the jury selection is apparently available and is being recorded. We were talking about this earlier. That has several issues involved in it already. That's kind of a major sticking point for people who are interested in trying to get fair trials. Not sure how these attorneys feel about the fact that the jurors are being recorded about things that are obviously going to be very personal for them. Is that going to detract from their ability to speak their mind, which is really important when you're picking a jury, and we'll talk about why that is.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed when listening to it seems that if they're saying their names or where they work or speaking about their family or anything like that, they are not broadcasting that live. They're muting, I guess, the audio while the potential juror is discussing their personal information. With that said, if I'm sitting in jury selection and I know that everything I'm saying is recorded and being broadcast to millions of people throughout the country and probably the world, it's going to make me a little guarded, I would think.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about jury selection and the practice of jury selection, because I think it's kind of the one thing that a lot of people have had experience with. Almost everybody who's over the 18 has been summoned for a jury at some point, and so everybody's been involved in this process. And I think a thing that needs to be impressed upon people, why it's so important and why it takes so long, is you're not necessarily trying to just find people who are bringing an open mind to the trial or who have no information about the trial. That's not really possible in this case. Okay, the little bit I read about jury selection already this morning is that apparently the judge asked for everybody to stand up if they've heard about this murder and if they knew about the alleged facts that have happened in this case, which is we know 2 people are dead and Alex Murdoch is being accused of killing them, his wife and his son. Everyone stood up. So obviously it's impossible to come in with a completely blank slate. So that's going to be the challenge for the judge and for both sets of attorneys, is to get people who already inevitably are going to have preconceived notions about what happened. They have some type of opinion, to come in and not bring extraneous information. Things that may be excluded at trial, people are inevitably going to have heard about anyway. This trial is about the execution-style shooting of his wife and his son. And he is alleged to have pulled the trigger, okay? But there are so many other things involved in the Murdaugh saga that everyone's going to have some type of knowledge about, even if they're very specifically going to exclude those facts and that information from this trial. It's going to be impossible for the court to truly exclude those things from being in the universe of the courtroom. So a couple of questions that I had about this jury selection is whether they were going to sequester these jurors as a panel or whether they're going to do them individually. You sometimes see it both ways. You sometimes see a combination of it. What they'll do is typically bring in a panel of, say, 36 jurors at a time. You're trying to get to 12, usually plus 2 alternates. And so you don't start out with just 12 jurors. You start out with usually 36, maybe even more. You might have 60, you might have 100. In this case, they're apparently bringing in 900 people. So I think they anticipate having to exclude a lot of jurors. But how do you get through this jury selection process and have the time that it's going to be necessary to make sure that you've talked to every one of these jurors and that you know something about what they're bringing to this case.
It's going to be hard. And one thing that they did early in December is they sent out a pretty substantial jury questionnaire to all of these 900 residents of Colleton County. And so the attorneys and the judge are going to have information about each potential juror that presumably they've already had an opportunity to look at. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they've already had an opportunity to look at those questionnaires?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk on court TV about questionnaires that, what a jury questionnaire is basically some information that's typically given in advance. And the thing about jury selection is you go into any courtroom anywhere in the country and jury selection is done differently in almost every courtroom. It's really not standardized. It varies from state to state. It varies from county to county. It varies from judge to judge. You really have to know how that judge likes to do jury selection and what they're comfortable with. Sometimes the questionnaires are sent out well in advance. Sometimes the questionnaires are given to the jurors that morning. And sometimes you're seeing them for the first time that morning and you're saying, okay, what does this person do for a living? What is this person married or single? Just all this general background information that you typically want to know from the jurors. And that can be important in a case like this. That seems irrelevant, right? But what we're talking about here is a case where a man is accused of killing his wife and son. If I'm the defense attorney, it's going to be very important to me to know whether they're single. Do they have a wife? Do they have a son? These are all really important things that are just background that they may be finding out this morning. They may have had some advance notice. And so that they're basically looking at everybody here. These types of things are going to be really crucial because obviously people are going to see things differently based on their own experiences. And that's the thing about jury selection that I think really didn't understand until I became a lawyer and started trying cases, is that jury selection is about trying to get people to admit what they're bringing to the table. What kind of biases do they have? Nothing wrong with having biases. We all have them. But the whole process here is trying to elicit from people where they may have a bias. They may not have even thought about it before, but they may in fact have something that is going to stand in the way of them being able to be fair and impartial when they're looking at the facts of the case. The classic example, in a case like this especially, has anybody on this jury panel ever been the victim of a violent crime? Has anybody ever had a family member who was killed, who was murdered? Obviously, that person is going to have some mental and emotional baggage from that trauma that could definitely change their perception of the case. You want to know if somebody has a criminal history, maybe been accused of a crime that they didn't actually commit. Everybody is going to have things in their past that is going to be reflected and that they're going to see through that lens, and they're going to see it slightly differently than the person next to them. It's human nature. It's inevitable. And that's the thing about the fact that it's recorded that gives me a little bit of pause. And you have to be very frank with people, and people have to be talking about things they don't enjoy talking about. And it's hard to do that if you know 1 million people are listening potentially. I just wonder how frank some of these jurors are going to be, knowing that there's so many people in the courtroom and that all of this is being recorded and broadcast live.
Another unique issue with this is that this family has been involved in the legal community of this area for a century. And not only involved, but wasn't it that Alex Murdoch's grandfather had a bust in the courtroom? So some of the questions that are probably going to be posed to these people are, do you have family members that were prosecuted by anybody in the Murdaugh family or had any, not direct relationship, but had a legal relationship in the sense that they were on the other side of a case? Or do you have friends that were prosecuted by anyone in the Murdaugh family? Anybody that was sued by Alex Murdoch? So wasn't it the bust of his grandfather that was in the courtroom itself?
I heard that this morning, that there was either a portrait or a bust of his grandfather, who was a longtime prosecutor in that courtroom, that they actually removed it. I can't imagine that there's too many criminal defense trials where they have to remove the portraits from the courtroom because of the relationship that the accused has with the pillars of the legal community there. It's a surreal situation that's happening there. The ties that the Murdaugh family have in the Low Country goes back a century, and it's just it's hard to imagine a more prominent person being accused of a more heinous crime. There's so many things about this that are frankly bizarre, and as you follow the saga that is the Murdaugh trial, the Murdaugh scandals, the Murdaugh embezzlement accusations, all of these things that are wrapped up in this case, it really just it defies belief, and if it was a TV movie, it would be unbelievable. Thing is, to watch as we see the jury selection play out is how long it's going to take. The way this works typically is they'll bring in panels of, say, 36 to 100 or so at a time. They will question these folks, and usually kind of like a banter session. It's like you ask questions, ask people to raise their hands, and then the attorneys will go through and kind of ask follow-up questions. Have you ever been a victim of violence before? Have you ever been accused of domestic violence? Obviously, probably no one in the courtroom has been accused of murder, but people may have faced accusations of domestic violence or, been the subject of a restraining order or something like that. These are obviously the types of things that both sets of attorneys, the prosecution and the defense, are going to be asking. They want to know who's bringing these things to the table. And it kind of makes you think as well, all 900 of those jurors that have been summoned know about this case. How much do they know? How much have they been following it? Where is the source of that information coming from? Like, have they been getting kind of pro-Murdaugh information or state prosecution information? I would imagine most of it is from the state's perspective. I haven't seen, anything that's really given Murdaugh's side of the story. And that's going to be really interesting to see if he testifies at the trial.
This is going to be something to watch. How long this is going to take so that they can, everybody can move forward with, we're going to get a fair trial here. And an interesting dynamic to this jury selection is not only, I think, is the defense trying to get a fair jury panel, but I think the state in this case is as well, just because of the amount of influence the Murdaugh family has had over this part of South Carolina. You're usually concerned about whether or not a defendant's going to get a fair trial in a high-profile case, and that is a question in this case. Can you get a fair jury panel for Alex Murdoch? But also, can the state go forward feeling that they've got a fair jury panel in a small county like this?
I can guarantee you it was the state who asked for that portrait of bust of his grandfather to be carried out of the courtroom prior to the jurors showing up. I mean, that's obviously a huge concern that they have. It's going to be difficult for the state. You don't know. I mean, people on the outside looking in, this has kind of become like a notorious figure, even though we're presuming he's innocent, obviously. There's been 20 episodes, Netflix documentaries, podcasts galore. I mean, so much.
There was an HBO miniseries, right?
A miniseries. I mean, there's so much attention given to this trial before it even happens. I mean, when have you ever heard of anything like that happening, right? I mean, besides the OJ trial, it just seems like that everybody has been exposed to this case in depth if they've been interested in it. It's been more than a year since the murders happened. So there's just been an awful lot of time for people to be exposed to certain aspects of the case and to create opinions about it and to bring preconceived notions about it, that it's going to be hard for the evidence that's presented in the case to be just on its face and for people not to consider things that they've been exposed to outside of the courtroom. That's going to be a huge challenge. And many people are going to have rubbed elbows in some way with the Murdaugh family. Not just Alex Murdoch, but also the son, who was a student at the University of South Carolina, went to the local schools there. Obviously, a lot of people would have known the Murdaugh children. people would have known his wife. She was, a very prominent person there. It's going to be a very difficult task to find 12 people who can look at that evidence and be fair and impartial without bringing a lot to the table.
All right, thanks for listening. If you found this video informative, make sure you hit the like button. And if you want future videos as we do a deep dive into the legal issues that are going to come up in this case, make sure you hit that subscribe button.